Great. Thanks, John. So in some of my research and writing, one of the things I've been tracing is the growing salience of this argument that might sound preposterous to you, but unfortunately is becoming stronger, is this idea that Islam is not a religion, but that it is instead a political ideology or something else, something that is not religion, therefore not deserving of First Amendment protection. And this argument is something that's so foundational that I think it's one of the biggest threats facing the rights of American Muslims in this country today. And as I'll explain a little bit, also a major threat to the First Amendment protections of all Americans. It's an argument that is often made explicitly but also implicitly by politicians, proponents of so-called anti-Sharia bills, which sound a little bit scary, but they actually deal with the rather mundane issue of religious arbitration, and most frequently opponents of mosque projects. So challenging the religious status of Islam, a world religion with almost 1.6 billion adherents, once seemed like a fringe argument, but is gaining ground. In a January 2018 press release, a South Dakota senator, a Republican running for a spot in the U.S. House of Representatives, questioned whether the First Amendment applies to Muslims. In 2014, a Republican lawmaker in the Oklahoma State Legislature said, quote, "Islam is not even a religion. It is a political system that uses a deity to advance its agenda of global conquest," end quote. In 2015, a former assistant U.S. attorney wrote in the National Review that Islam should be understood as conveying a belief system that is not merely or even primarily religious. In 2016, a former national security advisor told an Act for America conference in Dallas that Islam is a political ideology that hides behind the notion of it being a religion. So what's really scary for me is when this bogus argument moves from the political to the legal arena. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the U.S. today, particularly, again, in the land use context, involving either construction of mosques or Muslim cemeteries. Perhaps the best known example of this is a 2010 case challenging a county approval of building plans for a mosque in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. According to the mosque opponents, Islam was not a religion, but rather a geopolitical system bent on instituting jihadist and Sharia law in America. Because Islam is not a religion, the argument went, the mosque construction plans did not get to benefit from any of the county or federal laws that protect religious organizations. So ICM was unique in that the arguments were actually made in court, but in just about every other scenario where a local Muslim community is trying to build or expand a mosque, they are faced with strong public backlash, much of it centered again on this idea that Islam is not a religion. This is a story I heard from Dawood Abu Diab, whose mosque in Columbia, Tennessee was firebombed. It's a story I heard from Aya Khan in Montgomery, Alabama, when she was struggled to get a local mosque built there. And it's what the Muslim community in Farmersville, Texas faced when it tried to build a Muslim cemetery. So in the ICM case, the judge permitted a 6-day hearing in which the plaintiff's attorney asked the witnesses questions like, "Isn't it true that in the Quran, Muhammad had a 6-year-old wife that he had sex with? Is that your idea of what religion is?" He also asked, "Sharia law includes instruction on how to beat your wife. How is Sharia law going to affect our society, our jobs, and our freedoms? How can something be called a religion that promotes the abuse of women? Do you believe in having sex with children?" These are the questions that were permitted by the judge to be asked in, again, a 6-day prolonged hearing, and essentially amounted to putting Islam on trial. In that case, the DOJ had to file an amicus brief explaining that under the United States Constitution and other federal laws, it is uncontroverted that Islam is a religion and a mosque is a place of religious assembly. So at the time, it was startling to me that the DOJ had to step in to support the religious credential of a worldwide faith that once again has 1.6 billion adherents across the world. As the argument continues to gain ground, I can't help but wonder about its deeper implications. As a religious liberty advocate who's been in this space for almost a decade and who believes in the foundational importance of religious liberty, and the fact that it's human, that's rooted in human dignity, it raises the question for me that for these opponents, if they're denying religious liberty to American Muslims, are they essentially arguing that Muslims are not human enough for human rights? What I hear when I hear folks in Murfreesboro and elsewhere argue that Muslims don't get free exercise protections is that unlike other humans, Muslims have to earn their human rights. They weren't accorded those rights simply by virtue of being human. And it also raises the question that's, sitting here today in the context of legal protections, like how can we adequately protect the rights of American Muslims if their very sort of foundational ability to access those rights is being questioned? And so just to sort of reflect again on some of the broader implications of this argument for Americans across the board, Muslims and non-Muslims, is, again, so if you think about sort of what these arguments are saying, it's A, that religion can't be political, that it has to be relegated to the private space, to worship and rituals, and that the second that it kind of comes out into the public space and engages with politics, it somehow ceases to be a religion. It also erodes religious autonomy. It gives the right of people outside of a particular religious community the right to sort of parse through your beliefs and decide which parts of it are or are not religious. Most fundamentally, it cuts against understanding that religious freedom is a fundamental human right. Again, that it's a right that's rooted in human dignity, and that humans have this right simply by virtue of being human. And I also wanted to reflect on something that Professor McConnell said a little while ago about the sort of rising politicization of religious liberty, and the fact that it's rooted in this idea that many people, they see religious accommodations and they think of them as politically, poisonous because it's coming in a context where it's demanding an exemption from a right that they think is absolute fundamental, right? So again, like in terms of sexual freedom. And it raises a question for me, thinking about this argument that Islam's not a religion and the fact that that's being denied in some of these political and legal arguments to Muslims, that if American Muslims started to demand more exemptions, is that also going to begin to lead people to question the importance of religious liberty? I mean, in fact, we see that in the RLUIPA context. We saw that with the Park 51 controversy. We saw that with the Islamic Center Murfreesboro context and mosque cases across the nation, that this right in religious land use, RLUIPA was passed unanimously as well, and it was a bipartisan law, that somehow something that just seemed so uncontroversial at one point is suddenly going to become more controversial if Muslims begin to demand more access to it. Thank you. Yeah, so I agree with my co-panelists that the increasing sort of politicization of religious liberty is one of the biggest things to kind of keep an eye on, and the extent to which it impacts the application of the right in an intellectually moral, consistent way. In the American Muslim context, in a world, or extremely turbulent times in a world that's racked by terrorist attacks, I fear that anti-Muslim sentiment will continue to grow. The research definitely bears that out, that since 9/11, things have only gotten worse. And there's various polls, for instance, an August 2017 poll by the Annenberg Public Policy Center at UPenn found that almost 1 in 5 Americans believe that under the U.S. Constitution, American Muslims don't have the same rights as other American citizens. A 2016 survey by Pew found that almost half of all U.S. adults believe that some American Muslims are anti-American, and 11% thinks that most or almost all American Muslims are anti-American, and so on. There's plenty of polls and research out there that shows that anti-Muslim sentiment is only growing and getting worse. What makes that even more troubling is the fact that then it's translated into an increase in hate crimes. It's something that Harpreet from the previous panel touched on. John, you talked about it. Anti-Muslim hate crimes are the fastest growing in the U.S. And ultimately, just the impact of that in American Muslims' sort of sense of security and confidence in the U.S. Constitution. And again, as what I highlighted earlier, the translation of that sentiment to the legal arena, where constitutional rights are being challenged in terms of how they apply to American Muslims simply because of this anti-Muslim sentiment. Totally agree with that. I think sometimes focusing too much on the specific facts of a case tends to lead people astray from the foundational principles at play. I think also putting the focus on the human in the case, because again, too often a particular issue in a religious liberty case is thought of in terms of the politics at issue, as opposed to the human who feels a violation of their conscience and is bringing this claim, and to always sort of undergird the significance of religious liberty as a right that is rooted in human dignity. And as somebody who's a lawyer and who engages in legal research, one thing that's been very clarifying for me is to look at these cases through the legal lens and the jurisprudence and the tests that we have, and the fact that those tests address a lot of the concerns and fears that people have. The strict scrutiny standard, for instance, will make sure that if there's a really compelling government interest, that is fairly accounted for in the adjudication of an issue. And so I think that educating others about the law and how it addresses a lot of the issues that they worry about is, a hopeful, solution.
So thank you. With that, unfortunately, our panel will have to close.